All right, I'd like to introduce this new podcast we're starting called IWC News. It's basically going to be a weekly or bi-weekly roundup of news. There's a lot of articles out there on the internet. Most of them are not useful, and we are going to try to get through, the important news, what's really going on, what are the facts, and through the facts, people can actually understand what's going on, as opposed to just, politics and confusion on what's what. And so I'm Joseph Miller. I'm the one who's been recording many of the other podcasts. I'm the editor in chief of Pure Conversation. I'm also the founder and CEO of the international e-commerce conglomerate with Without Enterprise. Without Enterprise has a presence on websites such as Amazon, eBay, Walmart, and Shopify. And I'd like to introduce my new co-host, new to the company, Noah Montag.
Hi, my name is Noah Montag. I'm a tax accountant, and I am still taking the CPA exam, so don't expect to get any information about that. I specialize in tax returns and audits for trusts and partnerships. Some of the companies that I've dealt with have spanned the TMT field, which is technology, media, entertainment, telecommunications. And as a disclaimer, I will not be giving any tax or accounting advice on this podcast.
And just to prove the point we were mentioning before, that there's so much useless news, so many things that just don't make any sense. We're going to do a weekly, dumb media, just a funny quote or a funny article that just really makes no sense. It didn't need to be there. For some reason, people thought it was necessary. And, that'll justify why we have this podcast. So on election night, I watched a little bit of ABC News' election coverage. And there was one fellow, I believe his name was like David Meyer. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Muir. Anyway, so Stephen, what is he? Stephanopoulos. What's his full name?
George Stephanopoulos.
George Stephanopoulos asked this guy. He says, "What do you think about the election? What do you think is going to determine the outcome? What are the things to look at?" And the guy with a straight face just looks at the camera and goes, I think this election is really going to be determined, by who comes out and vote. Thank you very much. Whoever votes is going to decide the election. That really good piece of news. So based on that, I think start. So I wanted to bring up, with everything going on in the U.S. election, I want to discuss what it means to be a president elect. Like everyone's calling it. Fox News is calling it. They tried to call states before. People are calling states even before there are any votes. So I find it very interesting that there's a whole formal process for how a president is actually elected. Nobody's actually been a president-elect. Nobody's conceded, and Congress hasn't approved the formal count on electorals. So I find it very interesting. People are claiming the election. People are actually, both sides are claiming the election. With a lot of pending court cases, it might seem to be very damaging, the effect of what that's going to do with the economy, what that's going to do with, civil obedience. If you remember Bush v. Gore went on for 37 days or something like that in terms of who was elected. Nobody was officially the president-elect for 37 days. So I find it very interesting. What do you think?
I think that this election cycle is very interesting in the sense that there's just so many court cases that are going to be happening over the next month. And although we have a very strong inclination on who the next president-elect is, we are not going to know. We may not even know until January 5th, which I believe is the day that the electors vote in. The electors are presented in Congress. Obviously, Bush v. Gore was only one state, which creates less complexities. However, with this amount of lawsuits going on, this could go longer than Bush v. Gore.
Yeah, I'll just interject. I think, I forget what the term was, Wisconsin or Michigan, but they said that they're officially going to have their official ballot count on the day before the last official day in December. I mean, they really don't want their state to be called to the most inconvenient time. So they're not going to officially counting the last ballot until the end of December, which is really, going to cause a whole, being that that's one of the contested states, that's going to be a real problem if it actually matters, if that state actually matters to who becomes president. I'd like to talk about maybe a little, so what are the court cases out there that actually matter? Meaning, does anyone have any proof? Is there any why does the, I guess, current president think that he has a case? So some of the big ones are in Pennsylvania in terms of voter fraud. So they found 6 instances of dead people voting. So that's one thing. The problem is that even if 1,000 people, dead people voted, does that even come close to the threshold for it to even matter to Trump? On top of that, you'll see in other instances where there were large blocks of ballots that were uploaded that all went to Trump, all went to Biden in certain states. But again, can you actually prove that those are fraudulent? Even if something on its face doesn't necessarily look good, and even if there's reason for suspicion, still there has to be a formal burden of proof. So I think that was a big issue in Wisconsin, but it's going to be a problem because if it goes to the Supreme Court, they have no proof on that was the wrong thing to do. That those ballots were all cast fraudulently. Same thing with only one vote ballots. They found that a lot of ballots, that you vote for seats, you vote for local government on your ballot. I think this is also a big issue in Wisconsin, and they found that that there were like tens of thousands of votes which only voted for president, not for anything else. So again, it's not impossible that there are people who had no idea what these other seats were for, but they specifically wanted to vote for president. And even if they didn't, the burden of proof is on the Trump campaign.
This election is going to be around for a long time, and we're not going to finish
What do you say?
until
Longer than Bush v. Gore?
it's going to be longer than Bush v. Gore. Again, we have a very good inclination of where the momentum is going, but we won't have a final response. And number two is that with Joe Biden right now is trying to plan a transition. It's very hard to plan a transition right now because the White House has not approved yet of the ability to start the transition. So that creates a little bit of hardships for an incoming administration because they need the federal government resources and the like.
Yeah, it's probably very difficult, especially for the various agencies that are under the president. Because if you think about it, even Obama to Trump, they weren't exactly the best of friends, but Obama spent a lot of time explaining to him what's going on with each agency, the public policy, the private policy, classified information, what makes a big difference. So if we see that, Donald Trump pushes things off, assuming that even if he loses, he would potentially invite Biden to brief him on everything. It's very interesting to think, when Biden will actually know how to respond, the Biden administration will even know how to respond to anything going on, meaning are they going to know going in what the real issues are? Another big thing going on in this election is actually the House and the Senate. So the House, big surprise, but somehow, Republicans won, meaning they're not going to win the House, but they were expected to lose 15 seats, and they're gaining somewhere around 15 seats instead. Nobody thought that the Republicans can get anywhere close to 200 seats in the House. Somehow it looks like just by the current count, they're probably going to get around 200. In the Senate, it looks like they'll get at least 51 seats, if not 52. We'll have to see. There are 2 runoffs in Georgia. What are your thoughts on the current state of the Senate?
So obviously right now we're not exactly sure where the Senate is going to the layout will be. Currently it's 48-48 with 2 states that have not yet come back. One of the states is Alaska because Alaska has mail-in ballots and they still haven't received a tremendous amount of them. And the second one is North Carolina, which the media has not declared for, even though Donald Trump is in the lead, and Tom Tillis, the incumbent Republican senator, they have not called that election, but it looks like it's leaning Republican. In terms of, there was in this past week, there was a election in Georgia. However, if no candidate reaches 50%, then it automatically goes to a runoff between the highest candidates. So it looks like the case is that 2 Republican incumbent senators will be going to a runoff, which will take place, I believe, on January 5th. If the Democrats are able to maintain and win those 2 Georgia seats, which is unlikely but possible. as that election will be extremely expensive. There will be a lot of outside and inside money coming into it. It will definitely go down as the highest Senate race in terms of financially. And if the Democrats do win, which is unlikely, then Kamala Harris as vice president would have the potential or the ability to break ties, as the role of vice president is also allows you to vote in the Senate to break a tie.
Just to
And
be clear, it's 48-48. It's very likely that Alaska and it's very likely that Alaska and North Carolina are both going to the Republicans. And then there are two runoffs in Georgia who Republicans to retain the majority need two. If they, or at least one, if they lose both, then it becomes a split. Sorry, that wasn't so clear before. Go on, you were saying?
got it. And so in this, we don't have yet the results. However, it's expected that Mitch McConnell will retain his position as majority leader based on the current trajectory, obviously depending on the Georgia election. And Mitch McConnell is, as a side fact, has worked with Joe Biden for many years in the Senate. And this could be an opportunity for a possibility for bipartisanship.
It's very interesting to think, this year there were two very large races, financially speaking, in the Senate. Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, both of them were like record, like 90 million. Was it 90 million? They were the largest ever Senate money spent in the Senate. It's hard to imagine that these two Georgia elections are going to have any less, especially with such large stakeholders. I've seen on both sides of the aisle, there are different companies, people, private and public, who are going to really want to influence that election. Obviously, the Democrats are going to want to have control of both houses and the presidency to pass bills, to pass legislation, also potentially for the court. As they mentioned, they want to make some changes to the Supreme Court. On top of that, if you'll see that the big tech companies don't want the Republicans in Senate because the Republicans are going out, are currently attacking the Senate. The Republicans are currently attacking a lot of these big social media companies and big tech companies. Whereas if you think about the financial institutions, Trump rolled back many of the financial, Frank Dodd rule, many of the laws that Obama put into place to try to regulate things like banks and finance. So it's very likely that, especially, if you think about Elizabeth Warren, who was in the Senate, who was campaigning on reinstituting regulations on banks.
An incoming Biden administration would obviously change a lot of what President Trump has done, as there was a lot done recently in the past 4 years by executive action. And so one of the things that definitely President Biden will definitely roll back is the immigration enforcement, such as the building of the border wall and things of that nature, and catch and release, which President Trump ended. Those would be things that would be axed, as well as President Biden would definitely rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. The President Biden would definitely rejoin the Iranian nuclear deal. President Biden would definitely rejoin the World Health Organization, which has obviously come under a lot of fire during the pandemic. And one thing that's of very important note, especially for the defense industry, is that it could be that a President Biden would realign the national security interests of America in the Middle East, which could roll back some arms sales. And obviously throughout President Obama and a lot of Democratic administrations, the military budget was well funded. However, any rollback of arms sales to our foreign allies could affect companies' sales.
I was speaking to someone very recently. I can't remember who it was, someone involved in foreign policy, but he told me that once a country does something like they buy like classified, like non-public military things, for example, like a plane, like an aircraft carrier, something of value, something with classified information, it's very hard to one put sanctions on the company, right? So meaning if Trump's allied nations, if the nations that that he recently created treaties with and recently became friendlier with in the Middle East, if they already start buying planes and things like that, it's going to be very difficult to then roll back regulations because now they have that technology. Meaning even if relationships go sour, they have those planes, they have those they have those whatever they bought, drones, etc. So it's
Yes, but there are countries that, like for example, Turkey, who
yeah
was in the F-35 program. However, because of Turkey's actions recently, they did lose their F-35, and they were in the supply chain of the F-35. So it's very difficult for America to take them out, but America took them out of the program. And even if you do sell aircrafts, it's not like you can't ask for the aircraft back. But when we sell aircraft, we do not give the technology to that country. Only Israel has the capacity, is allowed, according to the U.S., to make upgrades to the F-35 fighter jet, which is the most prominent aircraft in the world.
the problem with that is the reverse engineering. You find with a lot of other foreign countries, I think China and Russia specifically have been trying to reverse engineer American technology. Now, I don't know where they are specifically. They don't share exactly with me their national secrets yet. Hopefully, as this podcast progress, we'll be hearing from them. But until then, you can imagine how dangerous it is. Especially with all the wars that have gone on. With the U.S. involved in the Middle East, it's a very big hotspot. And once they have, United States planes, it's going to be very difficult to reset the balance, especially since, as you mentioned, Israel has the technology and even has access to formal access of how it works. But if they have these two and they're going to reverse engineer them, you could bet on that. I'm sure every country, doesn't matter how allied they are with the United States, they are for sure trying to figure out how this works. It's going to be very difficult to offset the balance if you start selling those top grade weapons. That's a big thing to be looking forward or looking for in the Middle East. What do you think the biggest piece of foreign policy difference between Trump and Biden is there going to be? I mean, depending on this election, what do you think the biggest thing outside of the U.S. is going to happen?
I don't necessarily know if there is going to be that much of a difference. For example, President Trump put a tremendous amount of tariffs on China. It's going to be very hard because Democrats in Congress were supportive of the tariffs in general, even though they may have criticized some of the targeted responses by China against farmers. But in general, they were pretty supportive. I don't see President Biden being able to roll back some of the major tariffs that President Trump put on. I do see a possibility that some of the actions that President Trump took regarding, let's say, NATO, for example, how he was not necessarily the most supportive of NATO, President Biden would definitely reverse that. I think that one thing that could change is President Trump has made it clear that he wants the U.S. withdrawn from Afghanistan. I think in a President Biden administration that would probably be delayed. I think that President Biden might become more involved in Syria, although it seems like Russia has pretty much taken over a majority of Syria with the Syrian government support. And I don't know if there will be much of a role for the U.S. in the future there. Well, we don't have a treaty with China, but we do have some sort of. President Trump made a trade agreement with them.
That doesn't count as a treaty?
That is not a treaty.
Different?
That is not a treaty.
Mm-hmm.
That's an agreement. A treaty would be something that would be submitted to Congress, and they would vote on it. And if 2/3 vote in the affirmative, then it would be passed. There is something called an executive agreement, and that's what President Obama used for the Iranian nuclear agreement. However, that does not have the same status in law. And in theory, a person could go to court. For example, there was talk in 2015 that instead of trying to make a deal with Democrats on some sort of review process for the Iranian nuclear agreement, which they eventually came to, the Republicans in Congress would sue the Obama administration and say that the Iranian nuclear agreement needs to be submitted as a treaty. However, they did not decide to do that. In terms of the China relationship, I do believe that President Biden might want to relieve some of the tariffs. However, I don't necessarily see that coming to place because Democrats are so supportive in the Senate, specifically, especially Chuck Schumer, who's the minority leader currently, the Democratic leader in the Senate. He is very supportive of the China tariffs, and I don't see the tariffs being rolled back so fast. However, I do see some sort of lessening of the tension between America and China, which could help support companies such as Apple, who have been caught in the middle of some of the trade tensions between the Trump administration and the Chinese government.
Interesting. I wonder who would really benefit. What type of companies would benefit the most from a better relationship with China, or by better I mean more open relationship with China.
There's two types of sanctions.
Yeah.
There's one type of sanctions is that you sanction a company, and meaning American companies can't do business with them. Then there's another type of sanctions where even if a different company, let's say a company like Airbus, which is a company in Europe, does business with Huawei, we would sanction Airbus themselves. So those are two different types of sanctions. For example, with Iran, we have the second, which is a much stronger, and we basically make every company choose between working with Iran or America. And it's kind of a no-brainer to choose America because the economy in America is hundreds of times the size of the Iranian.
Yes, I'm not sure what type of sanctions they had on this company. I don't remember offhand. But yeah, you see, but we see there's a lot of big companies, U.S. and China, that might benefit from a Biden administration. I wanted to talk about one more thing, and that is the stock market. What's it going to be like under Biden administration versus Trump administration? So as I mentioned before, obviously the more control by Democrats, the more media is going to play, the more media and internet companies are going to benefit. The Republicans claim that they have monopoly type power, that they're too big, that they're too big, they need to be broken up. And naturally, the Democrats want to break down the financial institutions and other big companies, for example, Walmart and Amazon. So it'll be very interesting to see, how that plays out. Up until just a few years ago, it was mostly Walmart was the forerunner. Then what happened is Amazon came along, and then once the Republicans really solidified the Senate, then it became big tech. So you see that that a lot of these companies are
But the thing about big tech is that the Republicans do like to criticize a lot of the big tech companies. However, Democrats are also very supportive of breaking up companies. And for example, when the Justice Department under President Trump decided to mount a case against Google, Democrats supported it just like Republicans did.
Interesting. I don't recall if in the beginning of the Trump administration, when AT&T merged with Time Warner, I do not believe, but yeah, so it's very interesting to see that no companies have really been broken up in a while. It's interesting to see that now it seems like the Republicans are the ones going after companies. It would be interesting if the Democrats win the Senate, are they going to try to break up companies? First and foremost is most likely, I would believe, is Amazon. If you take a look.
But at the end of the day, Congress is not going to control antitrust laws. They do pass laws. However, Republicans in Congress have no incentive right now. There would only be a select few that would probably vote to change antitrust laws, and Democrats, I don't believe, would go along with it. Republicans believe that the Justice Department, in its current capacity, has enough authority under the current antitrust laws. So I don't believe there will be any action possible by Congress.
Correct, but it's the question is where it's influenced from. Meaning, if you look where politics is influenced from, often it's Congress as opposed to necessarily agencies. Even it's true. Most people don't understand is actually who has the power to do what. If you watch, C-SPAN, you'll think Congress can do everything. Most of the things they talk about or complain about, they can't actually do. It's really under some sort of government agency that they have the ability to regulate. But if Congress starts complaining about things, if Congress starts doing hearings, so that's when usually that sways public opinion, and usually that's when they try to convince the president, who does have the ability to control agencies, on what to do going forward. Any other thoughts on what's going on?
I think just a general statement on just stock market performance, how this could affect, for example, your 401ks, your IRAs, things of that nature. I think that President Biden definitely in the short term might help generate enthusiasm for a stimulus bill, which could help break the logjam and get that stimulus bill through. Obviously, the size of it would depend on if the Republicans keep the Senate or the Democrats control it. If the Republicans keep the Senate, I would expect that the Democratic Heroes Act will not come into fruition, not even close. However, I do expect that at some point within the next few months, there will be fiscal stimulus passed. And I do think just in general, that it's not always clear that the stock market goes with just who's president, depending on party. The stock market doesn't just go up when there is a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. The stock market goes up and down with business cycles. So I believe that over the next few months, it could become an opportunity just in the short term if there is a federal stimulus package passed.
Yeah, on that note, as you mentioned, does the stock market go by which administration? So obviously, a lot of it also has to do with who has Congress, who has the House, even the Supreme Court, even state and local government, who has the majority there. It's interesting to note, there's a lot of talk recently about certain Republican presidents that they underperform in terms of stock market growth. But it'd be interesting to note, if you think about just historically, so under Clinton, that's when there was the big .com boom, right? Internet companies just started becoming a thing. They were very exciting. Stock market went up like crazy. Towards the end of his administration, beginning of the Bush administration, that's when the .com boom collapsed, right? So then there was some sort of recession. Then Bush during the Bush administration, the market was doing okay, coming back, and then 2008, the Great Recession happened. Obama came into office, and built that back. But if you see what happened, it really depends on what was going on in something completely not to do with the administration. A lot of the times, you see that a big part of how an administration performs compared to the stock market has to do with where they're coming from. So if you come from a giant recession, if you come from a big war, for example, so it's very likely that you're going to outperform because the market is recovering, and then after the market recovers, it usually grows to new highs. So very interesting to think about, especially with what's going on with the coronavirus. There's a lot of talk with markets reaching new highs, but imagine, post-coronavirus, if Biden is president, then you can imagine that, right now the largest companies have outperformed and have reached new highs, but a lot of the mid-sized and the non-$100 billion companies, have not even recovered, or if they recovered only a bit. If you imagine a full economy under Biden, you can imagine wonders for the stock market. That just because there'll be people will be working, just because commerce will be back, just because all these businesses that are closed are going to be functioning again. So you can imagine a very big stock market boom, no matter who's president. All right, and I guess that concludes our first episode of IWC News. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. Have a great day.